So it's a pleasure to talk to you today. I'm a condensed matter physicist, and probably I will talk about a topic which is not very well represented in the conference, which is the physics of cuprate superconductors. I will make a review of where we are with this very old compound. I mean, it's probably the most studied set of compounds in condensed matter physics. And well, we are not settled yet on the solution, so it's still a mystery. And hopefully, I will present a few ideas which are very maybe unusual for this compound. So this is the most studied, compound in condensed matter physics. Namely, it has more, I think, like 200,000 publications. It was discovered in '87, and since then has led to a lot of progress and experiments on theoretical concepts. Also, were provided, which is kind of rare in condensed matter. So I want to dedicate this talk to late Konstantin Yefetov, was a Russian physicist based in Germany, I mean, former Soviet Union. And have been part of this work has been done with him in collaboration in the last, say, 7 years. He passed away last August, and this was just a fantastic time working with him. Okay, so here is an infamous phase diagram of the cuprates. You don't always see my screen and my little mouth. And so you see what we see when we see the phase diagram, we see three things. So this is copper oxides, and it's an insulator at low doping. So this is doping in oxygen. Then it starts to superconduct and very high temperature. And in between, we have this phase that we will talk about a lot, which is a pseudogap phase. Maybe it shouldn't be told the pseudogap, but maybe the dark matter. Like, this is very still mystery. It's a quantum state of matter, this we know, a mysterious one. And yeah, this mystery is still not solved after 30 years of studies, been almost 40 years now. And here on the right-hand side, you have what we call the strange metal phase for cuprates, where transport properties are also extremely unusual. It's maybe even more mysterious on the left-hand side. So I'll come back to that at the end of my talk, or in the middle, I don't know. So the pseudogap here, well, okay, so what's very unusual, first two things. I mean, you have superconductivity close to an insulator, and the highest that we have as superconductor at the moment. And it's close to a magnetic phase. That's something also which is unusual. The pseudogap was discovered in '89, so 2 years after this copper oxide superconductor were discovered. And here you see it's NMR. So this is a night shift, which is proportional to spin susceptibility. And you see a decrease in the night shift that those people at that time were able to attribute to a loss in depression in density of states. So why is it so unusual, the pseudogap for us? Well, if you look at the band structure of the cuprates, you see, like in this figure B, this is kind of a simple band structure. That's also one mystery of cuprates. It's kind of simple. On the left-hand side, if you dope a Mott insulator, you will get some little pockets here around the antiferromagnetic Brillouin zone, which are called the Hall pockets. So they have Hall-like structure. And on the right-hand side of the doping level here, this is big Fermi surface, very big one, which is typical of Fermi liquid. And here I show what we observe. So on the left-hand side, this is ARPES, angle result photoemission. So on the left-hand side, they were never able to do it because it's too much disorder. So these Hall pockets have never been observed experimentally. But on the right-hand side over there, we see the large Fermi surface, which is typical of a Fermi liquid. So Fermi liquid theory of Landau is valid, seemingly, on the right-hand side of the phase diagram. And in the middle, we see this weird thing like banana shape that we call Fermi arcs that are schematized in the figure B. And basically, it's like the electrons are gapless, but only on arcs. It's as if you had taken an eraser and erased part of the Fermi surface in the what we call antinodal region, which is 0 pi over there. And this is what we call the pseudo gap. So the pseudo gap opens on the 0 pi region over there. And it is unusual for theoreticians because we are not used to have Fermi arcs. This breaks Luttinger-Sum rule. So we used to count the number of particles by the volume of the Fermi surface here. And here we don't have volume. So does it mean that the arcs are closing backwards and we don't see the back because of, some kind of, let's say, some kind of multiple interference in our path? Or is it that it's big Fermi surface, large Fermi surfaces, and fluctuations or some type of things have erased the antinodal region? So here again, a new version of phase diagram by Brad Ramshaw. It's a function of all doping. And I'd like to classify all the theoretical effort that has been done in over the years in 3 broad categories. So it will be a broad classification. They are not exclusive of one another, but I think it will kind of shed a light of the way people have attacked this problem during all those years. So first, as I said, what you see is a Mott insulator. So this is meaning that electrons are extremely strongly correlated there. Typical energy for correlation of electrons is 1 electron volt over there. On the right-hand side, it's Fermi liquid. So we could claim that there is a QCP, quantum critical point, under the dome. Namely, the pseudo gap would be a real phase transition, which would be ending at 0 temperature, producing a lot of fluctuations at this quantum critical point. So namely, we would say like this phase transition, we don't know the other parameter. It might be very complex, very unusual. But once we will know what it is, we will solve the mystery of pseudo gap. So here you see an enhancement of a specific heat divided by temperature, which is proportional to the fluctuation. So this is kind of experimental incentive that we have indeed a quantum critical point under the superconducting dome. And last but not least, the pseudo gap might just be due to some fluctuations. It's basically the part I prefer. So, as I said, it's not exclusive. If you reach a metal insulator transition, particles will localize, namely the phase will start to fluctuate by Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It's a very simple quantum mechanical statement. So you'll get a lot of fluctuations in the proximity to a Mott insulator. And moreover, it's very anisotropic material, so you might have quantum fluctuations due to the reduction of dimension. So let's go a bit more in details. The first one, a strong coupling, and this was the prominent theory, basically put forward by Phil Anderson, who took almost 1.5 years, not even a few months after discovery of cuprates, put forward this very brilliant and unusual idea of a resonating valence bond. So pairs forms at different distance and superpose themselves and fluctuate. And this would be the solution, Anderson solution of pseudo gap. So it's strong coupling. It would mean that the electron is fractionalizing between a spinon and a holon. And this is protected by a constraint, which ensures that the number of degrees of freedom per site is conserved. So here, the spinons are represented by fermions and holons by bosons, but you could reverse the representation. And you have an emergent gauge field, U1 in that case, but you could have a SU2 version of it. So how do you describe the pseudogap in this phase diagram? Well, the spin-ons, they are pairing, like a D-wave pairing of Cooper pair, but it's on these spins below this red line over there. And here you have this particular hole of spin-ons, which is this black line here. And the holons, they are condensing below the blue line over there. So when one of the two species condense, this is reconfining. So below the blue line and the red line, you have confining. And since you have pairing, you will get the Cooper pair. So it will make a superconductor. On the top of it, here, you would get this preformed pairing of spin-ons, which is this valence bond spin liquid. And namely, this pseudogap is a spin liquid for Anderson. So this type of theory was studied for many years. There was a point where I suppose it was difficult to get a kind of a job if you didn't go in this direction. Correlations are supposed to be extremely strong and fractionalize the electron integrity into this elementary carries of spin-ons and holons, charge and spin. I don't believe in it personally for one reason. Is like ARPES has seen inside the superconducting phase, but in the pseudogap phase, ARPES has seen very beautiful Bogoliubov quasi-particle in the antinodal region. So this antinodal region is supposed to be a pseudogap. And in a pseudogap, it's supposed to your electron to be fractionalized. But well, okay. So namely, this pseudogap is completely reconfined inside the superconducting phase. And we can see the Bogoliubov excitations over there, which imply that the quasi-particle, the electrons at least, has its own integrity in order to form the Cooper pair. So the second part I want to talk about is the QCP under the dome. So it's not such a crazy idea. You have it everywhere in condensed matter physics. Basically, take heavy fermions here, magnetic transition, and above magnetic transition, you generate a superconductor. This is very common. Mainly, the pairing is not electron phonon, it's just anomalous, what we call anomalous superconductor, and very unusual ones. And the pairing is due to antiferromagnetic correlations. They're usually D wave. They can be P wave, like in this case, where actually the magnetism is not antiferromagnetic, but ferromagnetic one. And if you look at the pnictide, all the pnictide family have again antiferromagnetism and superconductivity in the dome. Here is this new heavy fermions as a valence transition here, density transition, superconductivity, antiferromagnetism. So this is not a very common thing, and it could very well be that although it's not really antiferromagnetism we have for cuprates, we have another type of phase transition. Like here we see we could have a density transition, and superconductivity is generated by a fluctuation of the order parameter that will favor the pairing of the Cooper pairs. So last one, fluctuations. So it's also a very old idea. So here paper is 95, but Vic Emery and Steve Kevelson has brought, not only them, I mean, a lot of theoreticians have gone to this, this idea, which fluctuations have to be there. So basically what they did is they suppose that we have a BKT transition for the cuprates. Namely, you get mostly two-dimensional superconductor, and you get the temperature transition by forming vortices. So it's vortex, anti-vortex that form pairs of topological defects, and you will reach TC this way. And there is a strong experimental evidence for that, which we call Uemura plot, revived by Chris Holmes in 2014. 2004. Later, you have a good version of this plot. So you plot the superfluid density here as a function of TC, and you see it's beautiful linear in T, which is typical of BKT transition. This is basically most experimental proof that we have vortices, anti-vortices, and fluctuations at TC. What Emery and Kevelson did, and they found a way by looking at the temperature max at which occurs the vortices compared to TC. And then they were able, by this way, for different various superconductor, to give an idea of what is the rigidity of the conductor and superconductor. And you see that the phase rigidity for YBCO is maybe 10 to the power 5 less than for a superconductor like lead. So there is a huge difference with normal metal superconductor for phase rigidity. So, okay, fluctuations are there. So it was a huge set of very good phenomenology, especially this is good for the Fermi arcs because it describes very well the closing of the Fermi arcs with the temperature. So when we reach T star, the Fermi arcs here are closing and give big Fermi surfaces above T star. But then there was a study of Nernst effect, which is able to assess what is about the presence of vortices, because you have a special Nernst effect, which has a special sign depending on the presence of vortices. So there was a first experiment by Hong saying that, okay, vortex are present very, very high in temperature, very close to T star. So namely, the fluctuation should be responsible, phase fluctuations should be responsible for pseudo gap. But then there was another set of studies in YBCO where this temperature was assessed to be close to TC, actually, not going up to T star. So this controversy was resolved, and apparently these people around Cameron Benya and Louis Taillefer, and they were correct. Here, the mistake that was made, if I can say so, that we can get experimental mistakes, is that you have two types of carriers, as we will see that also the charge carriers are present and they scatter through modulations, which basically in this compound by chance have the same sign as the vortex contribution to Nernst effect. Here the sign is opposite, so we were able to disentangle, those guys were able to disentangle the two effects. And now we know fluctuations are strong, phase fluctuations, but they don't lead to, they don't go up to T star, so they cannot explain the pseudo gap. Okay, so since I like fluctuations effect, I would like to continue a bit. So when you have a condensate, you can have phase fluctuations, which were what we were talking about, but you could also have amplitude fluctuations or fluctuations of more composite order parameter. So there brings me to recent developments here, which is the ubiquitous observation of charge order in the phase diagram of cuprates. So since with the year, there are a lot of experimental progress in these compounds, the phase diagram has become richer and richer, especially below T star. There's a lot of discrete phase transitions of discrete type with anomalous Kerr effect, breaking time reversal symmetry, sorry. Here at the low doping, you have a glassy behavior. You have what I say, the incipient charge modulations below T star in most of the compounds. We know that the wave vector is basically close, very close to this nesting wave vector of the antinodal region. And we know we can stabilize it with magnetic field, which is very unusual. And this under magnetic field gives a true long range order, which is almost no disorder, and with very nice Bragg peaks. At T star, in terms of discrete phase transition, pneumaticity has been observed, loop currents, inversion symmetry by torque experiments. So it sounds that we have some much more complex phase diagram, which some parasitic orders. So something typical of this compound is you have a lot of degeneracies, namely, I mean, you have antiferromagnetism, but you have also charge modulation, but you have also some kind of concomitant discrete phase transition, which can appear at higher temperature and could give also a QCP under the dome, if we think of it. So competing orders, charge modulation, strong competition with superconducting states. We know that from the beautiful STM experiments of Osman and Kapitulnik in 2002, So you do STM in these compounds. I see nothing. Probably you see nothing. But what these people do is they subtract 8 Tesla data from 0 Tesla data. And then suddenly, magically, you see the vortices with abricos of lattice over there. Beautiful. And inside the vortices, you see the modulations. And this is typical. You see, inside the vortices, you should see what the normal phase is made of, basically what competes with superconductivity. Let's say for years, when people were doing theories of RVB or fractionalized, I mean, they were asking SEM guys, do you see antiferromagnetism inside? Do you see, let's say, loop currents inside? Do you see inside the vortices, let's say, d-density wave? Well, basically, they saw something which is charge modulation. It's simpler than those complex theories, but it's charge modulations. So we have to, models in nature provide us with strong competition, with coexistence of superconductivity and charge orders. They say in the selenium or niobium triselenide, niobium diselenide case, we see here the charge orders in blue and superconducting orders in red. Difference with cuprate, as you will see shortly, is that there is a factor of 5 between the two, between the charge order and the superconducting order. In cuprate, there will be much of the same order of magnitude. Another recent STM experiment, which is quite unusual. Here is a phase slip of charge modulation that you can see over there with a phase depending on R. And this distribution typical that they see at 0 temperature of, they are at 4 Kelvin inside superconducting phase. There is superposition and coexistence between superconductivity and charge modulation. And see, distribution of phase is super random. Like it goes from -1 to 1. Now what they subtract, 8 Tesla, 0 Tesla, you see the vortices and the charge modulation inside. But very strangely, the phase slip becomes ordered. And this is on the very long range, basically the size of a sample. Namely, the amplitude is short range of the charge order, but the phase is long range. How about that? I mean, this is something that you have never seen anywhere. It's very unusual. So like the phase has longer, I mean, 2 order of magnitudes, roughly longer range of correlation than the charge. Yeah, probably 2 orders of magnitude. So in order to account for this idea, we get, that's the work we did with Constantine, we get an idea of an emergent symmetry. Say you have 2 orders like in chemistry, which are degenerate. Like in chemistry, you have that a lot. Like you see, you have a state which is degenerate and can get split, for example, with magnetic field. You sometimes have an emergent symmetry which enables you to rotate between one order and the other one. Now here, we take these 2 orders like bond density wave. So well, we call it quadrupole here, density wave, and superconductivity. And the rotation between the two will be typical SU2 group over there. So this allows for a constraint, and this constraint will be responsible for the opening of a pseudo gap at T star. Here's a paper that we did in 2013 with Constantine and co-workers. Typically, the effective field theory for this emergent symmetry idea is a nonlinear sigma model. We see the constraint here, the fluctuations, SU2 symmetry fluctuations, and we were able to find a model, where the symmetry is exact. And see here the Fermi surface of the cuprates, and here is the antiferromagnetic zone boundary. So when they cross, you have what we call hotspots when antiferromagnetism is big, and electrons can see it even at 0 temperature. And around these hotspots, if you look at the model with simple interaction, the SU2 symmetry is exact. In D equal 2, you have particle-particle and particle-hole pairing formation, and they are completely degenerate. Namely, you can rotate from one to another, and the order parameter, that is forming and gives rise to non-zero value for the sum of the 2 amplitudes is superposition of the 2 order parameters there. So to have an exact solution for an idea is always nice. This is what we got at the time. And this will open a gap in the Fermi surface in the antinodal region. So ideas of emergent symmetries, they are not new. They are apart from these fluctuation ideas. There was a huge set of body of theories around Su-Shen Zhang, also passed away a few years ago, and Eugene Demler, 2005, called the SO5 group. So SO5 is rotating between superconductivity and antiferromagnetism. So then you have 10 generators of the group because of the 3 generators of the antiferromagnetic group over there. Also, we know that at half filling, you have exact SU2 symmetries over there at half filling. And this was used even in a strong coupling version. Instead of having a U1 gauge theories, you had SU2 gauge theories. So SU2 symmetry at half filling is basically the same as ours. So half filling, you have a S wave and pi charge density wave. But for whole dope, this was generalized with SU2 group by around Patrick Lee and Charles Gangwen in the old days. So it was a SU2 gauge theory. So you fractionalize electrons, but you keep the SU2 symmetry group. So here, what we do, we don't fractionalize the electron. And we just have this simple rotation between charge density wave and superconductivity. Concept of SU2 symmetry. So this is for the half-field case, this beautiful paper by Yang and Zhang in 89, also very soon after discovery of cuprates. So here is the helical one representation with 2 superconducting order parameters because they have a phase, and 1 for the charge density with modulation, which is breaking translational symmetry. And we see that the rotation can be described by the pseudo-spin operator, which goes from one state to another. Here, L1 representation of a pseudo-spin. And then for Christoph, this is a pseudo-spin. So basically, it will behave like a spin. But this is less robust than a spin. This is topological concept, and it has a chirality, nonlinear sigma model. The topological defect can be protected from disorder. They will be very resistant to disorder, but this is always a bit less. You see, the constraint is emergent. It's not as robust as nature provides you a spin. Then, I mean, the constraint on the fluctuations of on the axis of the 3 axis of the spin operator is very strong. Stronger than this one. Okay, effect of magnetic field is very unusual in this material. As I said, charge order is stabilized by magnetic field. Here is an ultrasound experiment showing it. You see magnetic field above 17 Tesla. You stabilize 3-dimensional now charge order, uniaxial. And what is very unusual is see this temperature. Is non-existent, so it's flat. So it goes from superconductivity, coexistence, but charge order is going poof like that in one way with no temperature dependence. So this is typical of what we call, like if you have a magnetism, you have antiferromagnetism and magnetic field perpendicular to it. We have what we call a spin flop transition. Namely, it's not really a phase transition, it's more like a first order kind of flip. You know, the spins are, let's say, in XY plane. You put a magnetic field perpendicular to them, and suddenly after, when magnetic field is big enough, the spin starts to flip in a direction of the magnetic field. So that was very encouraging to us because, of course, we don't have spins and magnetic field, but if we have pseudo-spin, we could have a pseudo spin flop transition over there. And as I told you before, like it's very typical of superconductor, this high TC, that the maximum value of the charge order, you can see it here as well, is of the same order of magnitude as the superconducting order parameter. So there are people believing that charge order is an epiphenomenon, but still, if it's an epiphenomenon, then why is the transition temperature of the same order as the superconducting temperature here? So my belief, it's still a belief, it's not an epiphenomenon, and we checked this phase diagram with pseudo-spin flop transition within the nonlinear sigma model. So the nonlinear sigma model, what it has a constraint between the various, the two orders here. So the constraint is making you this flatness naturally. If you instead you use a Ginzburg-Landau to modelize the data, you need to fine tune like crazy to get the flat region. Moreover, you will never be able to get with the Ginzburg-Landau the coexistence that we get naturally within the nonlinear sigma model if we break a little bit the SU2 symmetry. So this was working very well. We were I think it's one of the nicest set of data showing that the competition between those two orders is a bit more than just Ginzburg-Landau competition that we could get, for example, in niobium diselenite or other compounds. So as you say, pseudospin here, like in 3 dimensions, will naturally have a topological texture, like you will get in magnetism with your beautiful skyrmion. It's not been observed, but this is one of the predictions of the model. It's fancy. It's a skyrmion in pseudospin space. We can, since topology is super fashionable, we decide to be part a bit of this fashion. Here, this is the analogy with SX, SY, SE. And again, we naturally have for free that inside the vortex, since the skyrmions in a pseudospin, you see this topological structure provides some modulation inside the vortex. This was the first thing that was seen. And actually, when you talk to experimentalists in cuprates, they are very much convinced by this type of things. They like it, like for free. The theory is based on what you see. So we took this as a basic fact. So we classified the factors of what we were seeing with the help of experimentalists we could talk to, who were able to listen to us and interact with us. So we say what is important, what is less important. Everyone is making his own ID. For example, I believe fluctuations are important, charge order is important. And I mean, the quasi-degeneracy between charge order and superconductivity is important. Then the idea of emergent symmetry was kind of natural. Okay, another idea that we got in the same line with exactly the same sets of experiments that we will explain for the pseudo gap is the fractionalization. But this time, not of an electron. You see, an electron is an elementary particle. It's tough to break. You need strong coupling. You need a very, very fancy theory to break an electron. We decide to break something which is not very stable in nature, with namely what we call a paired density wave. I mean, it will be easier to break something which is fragile. So again, I go back to this whole idea of slave boson with fractionalization of the electron between charge on and spin on, recalling you that a constraint is protecting the degrees of freedom, and an emerging U1 gauge field, which is also ensured by the presence of the constraint, will be present in the system. Here, we do the same type of thing with fractionalizing, not a fermion, but a boson. So our boson is a particle-particle pair, which is modulated in space here. So it has two elementary symmetries, particle hole, which is represented by this particle-particle pair here, and breaking of translation symmetry, particle hole pair, which modulation breaks translational symmetry. So paired density wave can be written in terms of operators as a commutator of the two elementary operators, and a constraint will protect this fractionalization here, the same type of constraint. So this is charge 2, translational symmetry, which will be what we see. You see, again, so we look at what we see. We see a superconductivity as a main order. So let's say here it's in a real space and it's particle-particle pair, so it's just a Cooper pair, which is Galilean invariant. And here is the operator which will break translational symmetry, which has a modulation of the charge that was observed experimentally, we have an emerging gauge field for the constraint. And this is our ansatz for the pseudo gap, which was the same as the one we got with SU2 symmetry. But there is no SU2 symmetry here. There is an emergent gauge field, which is a bit more fancy theory. So superposition, so it's an entanglement of the two orders plus a constraint. Superposition plus a constraint means the two orders are entangled. So they are in competition, but they are entangled. They are also in superposition. So the competition is a bit more fancy. Some people have said like the QCP of the cuprates and the phase diagram is the most entangled the QCP in the world, like people like Jan Zanen. I mean, big thinkers in the field. I mean, big shots. I mean, in the field, they all have their theory. So here we take this idea of entanglement, but we decide to entangle two orders only, two orders that we see, that we know are present in the system. The assumption we met is charge is not an epiphenomenon. To be entangled and meaningly entangled with the superconductivity, it has to be of the same order of magnitude. So again, like for the SU2 emergent ID, here the effective field theory is a chiral model, but it's a chiral rotor. So it's basically non-linear, it's equivalent. You can show, like, for example, a paper by Perelomov, the old papers that this is equivalent to a CP1 model. So basically it's non-linear sigma model plus a gauge fields, these famous emerging gauge fields. And here then we have a emerging gauge field with a confining transition. So confining, deconfining, this is a pseudo gap. And below TC, when we have the first real long range order, all the phases freeze. And on the right-hand side, in the strange metal phase here of the cuprates, we will get incoherent bosons. We'll come back to it. So we get this by elementary idea, we get this experiment for free with this idea. Namely, if you just get here below TC, the phases freeze of the two orders. But you see those two orders, they are very weird. One is inert to the, is neutral to electromagnetic field, which is the charge modulation. The other one, the delta, is active to electromagnetic field. You put electromagnetic field, you get Meissner effect. So below TC, since the phase of the two get locked, and they freeze and they get locked, this one will become active. So basically, in terms of symmetry, the charge density wave will become like a pair density wave. So it's a reconfining in a sense. So, okay, despite that, then we get long-range coherence of the spin flip of the phase because it is locking to superconductivity. So that's our idea there. We get it for free, but with this idea of locking of the two phases. Again, there is, as I said, analogy with SU2 symmetries with the same constraint for the two models. So it's the same type of ansatz, but it's different ways to reach into it. So I'll go to the strange metal. It's one of the biggest mystery of cuprates. It's this metallic phase here. But usually Fermi liquid has resistivity going like T square. And here, for 3 decades of energy, like 2 decades, let's say, you have resistivity beautifully going linear in T. It's extremely notoriously difficult to get by any theories of condensed matter. Namely, when we start to work on the strange metal phase, we were looking at the papers, and although you have 200,000 papers on cuprates, on the strange metal phase, theoretical papers, there are very few. There are like maybe 15. I mean, just to get one theory, to get the linear resistivity, one transport theory, this is notoriously difficult. So our idea, this is called the Planckian regime for resistivity. Recently, it was an analogy with holography where are going strong. It has a minimal viscosity. And we know from day one of superconductivity, which is a quasi-Drude-like conductivity, namely the optical conductivity as function of frequency has a Drude behavior with a time going like 1/t. So the linear in T resistivity is also seen in terms of optical conductivity within a Drude behavior for which the width is proportional to the temperature. The Drude peak width is proportional to the temperature. Well, then there was this controversy outlined by Anderson It's like if you look at the whole cotangent hole conductivity, sigma xx over sigma xy. If you look at Fermi liquid, it's written like NET2 tau over m, but then the tau is in t square. Tau minus 2, tau minus 1 is in t square. So it seems as if you have two lifetimes, one lifetime going like 1 over t, and one lifetime for the electron going like 1 over t square. This is a conundrum for cuprates. I mean, this one was kind of this unsolvable mystery of condensed matter, maybe tougher than the pseudogram, because transport, I mean, it's usually difficult, notoriously difficult to beat the t-square for conductivity. So recently, there were a study of whole conductivity for which we could get the number of carriers. And two groups, the group of Louis Taillefer and the group of Nigel Hussey. So they go with a group of Nigel Hussey that the number of carriers goes from small hole pockets here, like P, to big Fermi surface over there. So the same data, but interpretation differs, like they don't completely agree. They agree on the data, which is already something for the two groups, but they don't agree in the interpretation. So the group by Nigel Hussey told us, like, maybe we have another type of carrier, which will be seen like for this very gradual going from P to 1 plus P over there. So this new type of carrier, it should have H over T scaling. It's isotropic into B. It's incoherent, so it doesn't participate to sigma xy. And it has a Planckian limit, namely, it participates to linear interresistivity. So we decide to try, our best idea was like in our theories, since we fractionalize per density wave, we have charge 2 bosons, which are extremely well formed in the strange metal regime above the deconfining transition. So why could we get this boson? So we have a very recent experiment by Mitrano et al. I think this was even 2019, I made a mistake. And see, this is compressibility. So it's Mills' experiment with compressibility over there. And you see a plateau, but the size of the plateau, if you look at this omega here, is mostly very close to 0.8, 0.9 electron volt. Namely, it's the size of a strong Coulomb repulsion on site of roughly 1 electron volt. If you look at that and this data and give to one of your best friend who does statistical physics, he says, oh, but this is a jamming transition. So, okay, I don't know what it is. This is a huge energy scale, like it's an elephant. It's an elephant in the strange metal phase, seen by the Mills experiment. This huge energy scale here could be due to that you form bosons at high energy and they interact within each other and they jam. So they provide this plateau of jamming, like jamming when you have a traffic jam on the street. So these bosons, they have been observed recently with a pair tunneling in LSEO. They look at the noise. Sorry, I just didn't put many words in these transparencies. So this is E over V, like it's pair tunneling, and this is a noise. And they claim they see charge 2 particles over this whole phase diagram regime. So we decide to do a transport calculation with Kubo formalism with charge 2 bosons. To our dismay and surprise, it's never been done before, which is also typical of cuprates. You go to one line of thoughts and you develop theories, but then we change the line of thoughts with putting bosons everywhere, and especially charge 2 bosons, and it's never been looked at. For example, nobody has looked whether they could form at high energy, very close to 1 eV, so the energy of the Hubbard model or 3-band Hubbard model, whether bosons could be formed there. Nobody has looked at it, and this is some answer that we can get theoretically, probably. So it's something we did with our postdoc and ORAC. And so the bosons, they interact with a soup of fermions. So they have 2 types of particles. They are incoherent, so they don't participate to whole conductivity. So the idea to explain the mystery of the cuprates would be that bosons would kind of short circuit the transport for linear resistivity. And on the other side, you have a fermion soup which could be responsible to sigma xy going like sigma xy over sigma xx having a t square a lifetime. So very fortunately, we were very nicely having linear temperature dependence in 2D for discharge 2 bosons, and also a quasi-Drude conductivity, so linearity for the Drude. So this was very encouraging. So now we're trying to do with other type of technique like the memory matrix, which is a bit more like hydrodynamic technique rather than the Kubo. Since the bosons are very incoherent, it's difficult to have a Boltzmann treatment of them. They have a finite Q, which is important. And we need, in order to have something that is working, that there is a Umklaps with the lattice, so there is a coupling to the lattice. So we need that they are extremely well formed, these Cooper particle-particle pairs at high energy. So within this theory, we got a lot of prediction. I will go very quickly since I have still a few minutes, I think. We took a very simple toy model. So this is maybe the weakness. We got no microscopic model, but in the toy model, we could put by hand the G and V. We put next nearest neighbor interaction, Coulomb interaction for electrons in order that the charge is a little bit winning over superconductivity. And we decoupled and put the strong coupling by Gutzwiller technique and compare the formation and condensation energy of the pseudo gap, namely, remember it was a constraint, and each of the orders separately. And one of the good things we could get, it's indirect experiment, is this is the opening of the pseudo gap formation in bismuth 2201. And we got some very nice fitting with the data with the backbanding of the pseudo gap is forming not at KF, a bit away from KF, but the band is bending back like that. So there is a kind of Q square scaling, at least in this compound information of pseudo gap. We check also in the spectral function that our constraint was opening the gap. And this fitting with experiment is pretty good. So this I pass, it's a link with the MFT. I just go to Raman scattering, which is also pretty nice experiment. You see, Raman scattering is nice because it enables you to scan the Fermi surface in reciprocal space. Basically, due to the symmetries of the Raman scattering, you can scan, let's say, the antinodal region of the Fermi surface with B1G and the nodal region with B2G. So in the antinodal region, you see the superconducting gap opening and the pseudo gap. And in the nodal region, recent paper, they claim that they can see with an excitation peak the value of the amplitude of the charge density wave gap, which is the only experiment which is able to see it so far. And very intriguingly, they saw that this amplitude, they claim the amplitude of the charge gap is of the same magnitude as the one of the superconducting gap. Which goes very well with this idea of emergent SO2 symmetry or these ideas of entanglement of the two orders of fractionalized pure density wave. Here is the scale that they attribute to the formation of the pseudo gap. So within our small model, we were able to get the two order of same order of magnitude. We can explain phonon softening, which is also super anomalous in this compound. So you see, when you have charge order, you usually see phonon softening below the ordering of the charge. Here is a typical piles where the charge is ordering at this wave vector, and you see the phonon is softening at this wave vector. Here, cuprate see the phonon softening, but below TC, superconducting. So what does at the wave vector of the charge, but below superconducting? It's a very nice phonon softening, but it's below TC and not T charge. So why? So we got it within our model by saying that the phases are looking only below TC and you have a lot of phase fluctuations above TC. Okay, these are my conclusions. So we have an idea of entangling two other parameters that have been seen experimentally, namely particle-particle and particle-whole order parameter. We're trying to get direct prediction, a smoking gun experiment for this idea through Josephson effect, and maybe through some noise as well in the charge system. Some theories will maybe, this is our prediction of bosons at high energy in this system, we might be able to check that theoretically as well. With this, I will thank you for your attention and take your questions if there is any.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Are there any questions?
Yes, maybe. Can I have one question?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, so the more I listen to your presentation, the more I know that I know that I know almost nothing actually. So the first question is, the pairing mechanisms. So do you suggest there are different pairing mechanisms corresponding to different regions of this phase diagram? Or is there one universal pairing mechanism? Because in low temperature superconductors, the pairing is by phonons, right? And so do you have any hypothesis or theory about pairing mechanisms in high TC superconductors?
Yeah, actually, this is a very good question. I'm sorry, in my review, I didn't, I don't address this topic. The pairing mechanism is something that we almost have a consensus now. So this is not, it should be due to the antiferromagnetism, which naturally predicts a D wave superconductor. Maybe there's a bit of S wave still under debate, but no, the idea here is that the pairing is due to antiferromagnetic interactions, which provide a very nicely D wave superconductor and also provide actually charge density wave. If you take the toy model we had, for example, here, but this is a consensus. It's very few consensus on these compounds. It's one of them. It was highly debated, like in the early days, and it was a huge fight between S wave and D wave. And it happened in this history of this fight that the idea, so you see, this material is extremely disordered and TC is very high. And it is notorious since the work of Anderson that S-wave pairing is insensitive to disorder. So Anderson and Varma and other people say like it has to be S-wave because it doesn't react to disorder. And there were other people around David Pines saying like, look, the antiferromagnetic interactions are so strong that they will lead to D-wave pairing. So Pines was correct. I think just for that, maybe he should have got a Nobel Prize. And what happened is like theories of disorder completely overestimate the influence of disorder on a D-wave superconductor. They completely overestimate it. Namely, the estimation was difficult. So this is a typical overestimation of the role of disorder. So there is a consensus now, it's D-wave. And if you look at the mechanism, I can show you, unfortunately, I don't have the real, for example, the review by Patrick Lee, you will be able to find it. But even in our little toy model, like say here, you see I take C and G. So this is antiferromagnetic correlations. You can decouple into the particle-particle channel or particle-hole channel. And particle-particle channel, if you solve the gap equation, you need to be D-wave or you get nothing.
Are you familiar with Professor Spałek work from Jagiellonian University? He deals with this same Hubbard. This is TJ model, which you are showing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, he's one of the guys that works on it. Anyway, just...
So maybe what does he believe? I mean...
well, probably he has the same type of direction of thinking as you do. And he was the inventor of this TJ model, which you just pointed right now, but yeah. Yeah.
No. I think most of condensed matter physicists have worked on this project. To tell you the truth, I started to work on it like 7 years ago. And at some point, we did it because we got this idea of emergent symmetry and there was charge order around with Konstantin. And then we got this kind of fancy theoretical ideas that we wanted to check. If I didn't get a new idea, like the field is tough. You have all these big shots have their own ideas, don't listen to you. Experimentalists listen to you. But theory, between theorists and I'm not still at the level of seniority of those guys. So, okay, at the end of the day, I think experiment, it will settle down. There will be only one solution for this. Which one it is, I don't know.
And very quick question.
I believe there will be some paired density wave in the picture. That's pretty sure.
Yes, there is a question.
Yeah, there is. Perhaps you know that Feynman and Wheeler once were analyzing considering situation that maybe in our universe there is only one electron. Going further with this, you may think of electron in the solid, whatever it is, as a one wave.
Yeah.
One wave.
Yeah.
So then instead of speaking about particles, coupling, decoupling, etc., you may speak about property of this wave in volume in certain direction.
Yeah.
And when I was hearing this, I'm not working in area of superconductors. I was thinking about what property should have a wave to be easily moved through the space. And I think that over twisting, certain numbers in quantum chemistry should be exactly the same in some directions. I feel this in terms of quaternions, but you perhaps don't know this, so I cannot switch immediately to the Dirac-like, expression.
Actually, this SU2 emergent symmetry can have a description in terms of quaternions. Oops. So yeah, in a sense, you see, it's not your idea is not far from what we are doing. I didn't talk to you about electrons at all. I talked to you about bosons, I mean waves, which is, it can be particles, but you have also phases associated to.
Sorry, I lost the beginning of your talk, so I didn't see this. Yeah. Thank you very much. So
look, you have these SU2 rotations, and in the paper you will find in our paper with Konstantin Yefetov that we could describe also in terms of quaternions. It's also a quadrupolar for the charge. So we were having fun at the time. It's exactly at the time where people discovered these waves in the black holes in cosmology, and this was a quadrupole as well. So I mean, nature likes those type of symmetry and likes to organize the waves in terms of symmetries. So when you get an original idea, even for such a complex system as this one, I mean, you will take ideas from some other fields, and namely these confining ideas is coming from high energy physics ideas and field theory, typical.
Thank you very much.
There is one thing we agree to be, I think there is a consensus that say the competition between the charge density wave and the superconducting orders is not just a simple Ginzburg-Landau. I think there is people agree on that. I mean, experimentalists would agree on that.
So do you say that inside the vortex there is a charge or skyrmion? Because inside the vortex in D-wave superconductors, you mentioned about some skyrmions. What was
Yeah. My interpretation of the charge inside the vortex here. You see my screen, huh?
Yeah.
So it's a skyrmion, yeah. So namely, the vortex is a topological defect. In terms of this pseudospin SU2 symmetry, this is a skyrmion. So you see inside the vortex, I destroyed the superconducting order parameter. And since I have a skyrmion, my charge ordering parameter is going up. So here is the skyrmion representation.
So you suggest there are two topological numbers: quantization of magnetic Hall flux plus a topological number responsible for skyrmion. So you yes, suggest there's more than one, right?
A simple vortex will be just a U1. U1 symmetry. Here I have an SU2, so indeed I get a skyrmion.
How certain you are about this claim?
I'm certain about the prediction now. Whether the experiment shows shows a charge inside. Whether it's a skyrmion or not, the experiment will not tell you.
I know that there is some theory shows also existence of some small induced charge in vortices in low temperature and high temperature superconductors, but this effect is quite minor from the point of view of theory. I remember there was some.
Wait a second. This is a big fact for us. Take for example, niobium diselenide. Inside you have niobium diselenide. Maybe we find it here. well, it's not like that, but it has a 5 times bigger charge order than superconductivity. You sit inside the coexistence phase, you do the vortex, you don't see anything inside the vortex. So here we see something inside the vortex. So you have 2 ways to explain that. First, it proves experimentally that the 2 orders are in competition. Then you could say it's Ginzburg-Landau competition, it's just a typical competition, or you could say it's something more fancy. So here I give you the solution with the skyrmion is probably the simplest, more fancy solution. Namely that you have a constraint. Why I don't believe it's Ginzburg-Landau, it's because of this experiment where it's flat. So same idea, pseudo-spin. We've tried to fit with Ginzburg-Landau, we try to fit with nonlinear sigma model. With nonlinear sigma model, you have it for free, the flatness. So it very looks like you have a pseudo-spin, that you have this kind of constraint relying these 2 orders, making a kind of a pseudo-spin out of the 2. With a pseudo-spin, you will get a skyrmion, that's a prediction. And the skyrmion can explain, of course, the presence of charge order inside, but it's not, let's say, it's not a smoking gun. The observation is, it doesn't kill the theory, but the theory is, you see, you could just the observation of charge order inside could also be explained by Ginzburg-Landau. This I don't think could be explained by Ginzburg-Landau. Is it clear?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for
I think at the moment, Experimental is doing STM. They have made huge progress, and maybe we will be able to have a smoking gun experiment for the constraint who is looking at disorder.
Thank you very much, but I have to interrupt your discussion. Yes, it seems we can speak about this mysterious.
Yeah, this is a nice for ideas, yes. For bubbling ideas. This is a nice playground. This is nice. It's completely different from your playgrounds, but you see, these cuprates have been used for cold fusion. So I want to mention that at MIT recently. So, I mean, you make these fantastic theories for a very mysterious state of matter, but they can still have a very strong application.
Okay, yes. I remember how enthusiastic we were when these cuprates were discovered 35 years ago. So, and now I realized how difficult is this field. And most probably we need additional 30 years to understand.
Well, probably we need that a new generation settles. Yeah. It will settle. But frankly, you give a conference, and when the day of cuprate is coming, this is a hot day. I mean, still people like to chat, to fight with ideas, with concepts, with experiments. You have so many experiments, so many ideas, so many. This is fun.
Thank you very much.